Um, Good morning, welcome. We're going to do GED informational webinar number 2 today, and our topic is going to be about bridging the gap. So looking at those students who might be sitting somewhere around a 140 or a 144 that we need to get over that hump and what we can do in order to be able to help them get there. So thank you for joining me. If I don't know you, which I think I know almost everybody on screen today so far, um, my name is Amanda Ruth, and I work with the Professional Learning Opportunities Project as a consultant. And I got the privilege of going to the GED conference last summer. So I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of the information that I have today is coming from that conference, a little bit of additional resources that I pulled in as well. At the very end of the webinar, I am going to ask if you wouldn't mind taking just a minute or two to fill out a survey for me. I know that everybody is super busy, but it's just going to ask some quick questions about what worked, what didn't work for webinars 1 and 2. And if you didn't attend either, that's all right. You can always fill it out and just give us any information that we've got. So let's go ahead and get going. We've got an action-packed hour. If along the way you feel like you've got a question, please feel free to stop me and just unmute yourself. Let me know if you've got something that you would like me to answer real quick, and I'll be happy to do that. So once again, we're just kind of working on that 144 to 140 to 144 range and identifying some of the tools that are available to help our students get over that hump and get their GED credential. We're start out today with reasoning through the language arts, or the RLA test. The reason that I decided to start here is because there were a bunch of different questions that I got before the webinar, a couple that I got from the last webinar, and I'm hoping to take time to look through this and get a good understanding of the reasoning through the language arts and kind of where students might get caught up, but also some of those questions that we had about how are tests being scored, what can we do to help our students get through that. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was getting caught up with word matching. And what I mean by word matching is looking at the passage, looking at the multiple choice answers, or maybe there's not a multiple choice answer and you're trying to write a short answer where you're trying to quickly match the words to get the question answered, which when our students are quickly working through the exam, they might incorrectly do some word matching. In order to look at a good example of this, I'm going to pull out a practice test question that I'm hoping is going to help us. So on your screen, I'm hoping that you see a picture of a little passage that has the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and it's a 3-paragraph little passage, and then there's 4 questions. Is that what you guys see? All right, thank you. Appreciate the thumbs up. What I'm going to do is stop talking for just a minute here. I want you to skim over the passage real quick, look at the answers, and tell me what you think, either in the chat or you can unmute yourself. What do you think the correct answer would be? I'm only going to give you about a minute to do it. All right, so we're rounding out our minute here. Any ideas about what the correct answer to this question might be, or what an incorrect answer might be that students might give? Okay, A. Thank you. So I'll tell you that A is the most common answer that was given for this particular question, but it's not the correct answer. And what happens is as students are quickly scanning through, they see in that very first paragraph that it talks about running aground. I'm sorry, did you have something to add, Michael?
She's due at 1:30 now.
Oh. You want me to tell her to come back at 1:30?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
All right. So I'm sorry, Michael, did you have something that you wanted to add? Okay. So the correct answer here is actually D, that Captain Hazelwood disembarked to conduct his business. And the tricky part about this is when they read that very first paragraph, they notice that it says that the oil tanker ran aground. And so they see that as an option, and that is not actually what happened first within the passage. A lot of the passage, and this was actually taken, I believe, from a science or a social studies practice test, a lot of the passages will do this where the chronological events don't necessarily happen chronologically as they're reading. And if a student fails to notice that, they might get thrown off and they might get the question incorrect. So it's a tricky way that sometimes folks get stopped up with that. So word matching is one of the ways that we have some common mistakes. Looking at the texts that the students are going to see on the test, about 75% of the texts are going to be informational, and then about 25% are literary texts. And those can be in a wide range of different genres, fiction, poems, that type of thing. When you're looking at what a student might be comfortable with, I always like to keep that statistic in mind so that they're reading the types of things that they're going to see when they take the test as well. And one of the most effective ways that they have found to actually teach grammar is looking at grammar not just as a separate lesson, but looking at grammar in context. And when you're teaching grammar in context, it's always best if you have an example that students can draw from, that they might be comfortable or that maybe even they have read. But if you don't have an example of something students have written themselves to look at, one great resource that you might want to take advantage of is something called Everyday Edits. And if you haven't seen these before, the everyday edits are actually broken down by month. So we're going to take a look at the February one since we had that opportunity. And I will say that this very first screen can get a little bit glitchy with ads sometimes. So that is something to take into consideration as you're preparing for class. When you select your month, and there are at the bottom some additional ones that don't necessarily go with a particular month, in case you just kind of run out, you'll see that there's a wide variety of topics that you can choose from. And if we pick one, I think I picked Huckleberry Finn. If you show this on the screen, there is the uncorrected text on top, and then there's an answer key on bottom. So sometimes you might want to zoom in or change your frame. If you don't want them to do that all as a group, you can also click on to have it printed out. And it prints out fairly nice in a PDF with 2 per page. And they can do the individual copy at their desk, or you can have them collected so that you have that. So the link for this, I will give you the beginning link. This will take you to the list of February edits, and you can go back if you want to look at edits from different months. And then you can choose one and it will come up like this. So one of the reasons why these really work nicely is if you are going to teach a science or a social studies lesson, occasionally these will lead into a great segue of here's what we can do for you. So you can use those as a way of correcting the grammar in context without necessarily having a student passage if you don't have a student passage available. Back to my presentation here. And already looked at that. So talking about the essay on the GED test tends to be a real hot button topic. So if you have any thoughts or opinions, feel free to share them with me and we'll look at them. There are 3 different traits that students are being graded on: creation of an argument and use of evidence. So looking at what they're doing for their supporting details and creating their argument. Development of ideas and organizational structure. So looking at that paragraphs, looking at the structure of the essay overall, and then clarity and command of standard English conventions. One of the questions that we had from the first webinar was kind of how students got their grade. And I had to do a little bit of digging, a little bit of talking with the GED team. And from what I gathered, each trait is graded as a 0, a 1, or a 2. After each individual trait gets their grade, they take the 3 grades and add them together. So that means if a student got a 0 on trait 1 and trait 2, but a 1 on trait 3, when they take those, add them up and average them out, they're going to end up with a 0 because they didn't get enough points overall. And it's a little bit confusing as to how that works. If you have any direct questions, I would recommend reaching out to GED support. If you have something more specific than that you would like to ask them, they were really helpful with trying to work, and they might be able to give you some additional information. One of the things that a lot of folks express frustration about is that when students are getting that 0, how is it happening? So the automated scoring engine that GED has is able to grade about 95% of the tests that come in. There are that additional 5% that there's not enough unique writing to be able to use the automated scoring engine. And so because of that, they are then hand graded. So oftentimes there will be an essay that's graded with automated scoring engine, but then it does go through a hand grading as well if it was on the edge. But most of the essays are able to be graded with that automatic tool. And one of the things that is important to think about is that ability to have enough of the unique writing. So a lot of times students are quoting things in their passages or they're pulling details out from the reading that they did, but they have to make sure that there's enough of their writing there to support the fact that the automatic scoring engine will realize there's their own unique writing. One of the other things that can sometimes be a little bit confusing is that students are sometimes given one passage and sometimes they're given 2. And sometimes they're scrambling for that second passage. If there is just one passage, it will contain both sides of the argument, but it can be a little bit confusing if they aren't able to see the 2 passages. So something to kind of talk about, discuss, that if they don't see 2 passages, it's okay, but they should still see both sides of the argument, no matter if they have 1 or 2 passages. As we are looking through that extended response and thinking some more about those top student challenges, we have to remember that responses are not expected to be perfect. This doesn't look like something that a student that's been working on this for weeks or months should be handing in. They're expecting that there should be some maybe spelling errors or some things like that. So everything isn't penalized. But at the same time, they should hopefully take that last few minutes before they turn it in to look it over so that they can catch some of the errors that may be there. Also, another point that I like to bring up here as well is remember that the response, the extended response on the GED is timed separately. I know some students get that confused with the high set response because there is the ability to do the questions and the essay at the same time. One of the big problems that was addressed is looking at how students are approaching the essay and not just reading and summarizing. So when they're writing the essay, if they're just looking at here are the pros and here are the cons, that's more of a summary versus what they're looking for, that argumentative essay where they're picking the better supported side and then using evidence from the passages to support their opinion, or not their opinion, to support their essay. And looking at opinions, the test is looking for that argumentative essay, not the opinion piece. So we're really looking at trying to make sure that the essays our students are writing are focusing on the statistics, the quotes, the things that are written there, not just on what they believe, which I know it can be kind of hard to separate out sometimes. But that was one of the big things that came out of our work. And also, once again, not using enough of their own words so that the automatic score can't score and then it has to be hand scored, which oftentimes still represents not enough original text to be scored, and that would give them a score of 0. Before I move on, I talked a lot about the RLA. Does anybody else have any other questions you would like to kind of ask or answer before we move on? All right, go ahead and unmute yourself and I'd be happy to answer your question.
Yes. Well, first off, thank you so much for what you've shared already. And one thing that stood out to me was the the question about the passage, the example that we went over. And I was one of the people who got that answer wrong. And I think it also goes to show how a lot of standardized tests are trying to trick test takers, unfortunately. So I'm wondering, in your experience or what you know of, like when it comes to teaching test taking strategies and, working with learners to better understand how you have to do that extra step, because there's, the comprehension of the passage, but then there's knowing how to take the tests specifically. So I'm wondering like how you've navigated that in the past, or how does that come up in, GED prep?
Sure, thanks. That is a great question. So the GD, as they've kind of tried to perfect that perfect level of how many passages are too much so that they don't have enough time to read, has been looking at some of that information and kind of looking at how many passages it's able to put in there so that students really do have that time to go beyond that surface level scanning and really look at what's being asked of them in the question. So I think the best answer I can give you, and it may not be enough, and I apologize if it's not, but to have students look at the question and make sure they really understand what the question is asking, maybe even before they read the passage. So looking at the question and knowing that you're really looking at the sequencing of the events versus just that word matching of, oh, this is happening in there, I've got this answer right here, I'm done. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. There were a couple of other resources that I did want to look at real quick. I'm going to pull back up that website. go. So on here I have the everyday edits, but also two things that I think are extremely important to have for any type of RLA prep. This first one is a little bit outdated, or not outdated, it's a little bit older, but there is an extended response resource guide for adult educators. And that is on the GED website, but I am going to give you the link here in just a second. And another really important tool, and this came from one of the Tuesdays for Teacher webinars that they have. And this was a chance to analyze writing samples. And it gave one of the practice things, but what I really thought was one of the practice responses, but what I really thought was interesting is this little quick check that they made for each of the 3 traits. And it gives students a way to say, yes, I met that, or no, it needs work. And if it needs work, what do I plan to do? And this is something that, once again, you can print off and you can use in addition to the scoring tool that is on the website. And let me get these 2 links to you so that you'll be able to use them as well. Of course, it always goes easier when you don't have an additional screen up here. So here is the analyzing writing samples. There we go. And that was the one from the Tuesdays for Teachers. And then also going to grab for you other link. Apologize. Here is the link that also has multiple examples of scored responses. So you can show students, here's a 1, here's a 2, and talk about those different characteristics as you look through. One of the other resources that is available to you, and we got to talk a little bit about this before, there are those Alice videos, which is the 8-part series where she breaks down all of the different aspects of writing, how to approach the essay that you can use in class, or you could have them view the videos and then ask questions as they come to class. Also, a great idea of using AI to create some of those passages and then actually critiquing AI to pick out whether or not they had those characteristics using the rubric that I showed you, and figuring out what you could do to make it stronger or weaker. Depending on how fine-tuned your AI is, you might actually have to throw it off so that you are able to get some passages that meet what you are looking for. Using simple sentence frames, a lot of our students will say, Article 1 is best supported, and they'll end it right there. But using this sentence frame that I have, what is the side that's best supported, and then because, just adding that one word so that they can get the idea that they need to explain. And then there is an RLA assessment guide. There's actually an assessment guide for each of the individual tests. And there is actually a glossary of terms in the very back of that students can use to help them prepare for help them prepare for the test. I seem to have lost that link. I will get that link to you before the end of the webinar here. So those are great different ways, and these key terms are going to be something that we talk about a little bit more when we get to the science and the social studies as well. So mathematics, that's where my heart is. I love teaching in the math classroom. And I've definitely had a lot of students that have gotten to that last little part, but they've had a hard time getting over the last little hump of making it from, 142 to 145. So looking at some of the things that we can do to help our students that are struggling in this area is that one of the things that you're guaranteed to have one or two questions about in the non-calculator portion of the test is some ordering questions. Oftentimes they're mixing decimals, fractions, and integers together. So looking at the positive half of the number line and the negative half, as well as how comfortable they are with manipulating those fractions and the decimals. So if you're trying to get those last few questions, this is an area where you might be able to make a really big impact with the students. There's lots of great different number line activities that you can find on Desmos or on Polypad, if you're familiar with either of those two resources, and just getting folks comfortable with putting numbers between 0 and 1, or even 1 and larger numbers, along with looking at positives and negatives. Another two resources that I thought were really, really helpful is the calculator tutorial, so that students understand the type of calculator that they'll be using. I know a lot of students feel more comfortable with the handheld calculator, but kind of getting that whole process down might be helpful. As well as some calculator prohibited indicators. And the calculator prohibited indicators, when you look at those, they're kind of looking at on those questions where you can't have a calculator, what are some of the types of questions that they might see and how might they be able to best answer them. And along with the assessment guide that I talked about with the RLA as well, there's a glossary of terms, kind of the common words that they might see in a question that might be confusing, and just making sure that they have those words in their word bank is a great way to make sure that they're prepared. I don't want to move on too fast, but I want to make sure that we're able to get to all of our resources today. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask about the math? I know we spent so long on RLA, and now we're kind of glossing over my favorite one. And the two links that I'm putting in the chat are those two that are on the screen, the calculator tutorial, as well as the calculator prohibited indicators. So some good resources that you can use.
Amanda?
Yes, Michael.
Did I hear you mention a resource called Desmos? I wasn't sure if I heard that correctly.
Yes, Desmos is a website that has a number of different preloaded activities, but they also have an activity builder that you can use. If you're interested in learning more about Desmos, if you're going to PACE, I'll actually be doing a PACE presentation on that. Or if you have some time at the end, I'd be happy to go over Desmos and how you could use that to help your students as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great, absolutely. And at the very end, I'm going to give you a link to the PDFs of all of the assessment guides together, but I will go on the GED website and kind of let you tool around there to see if there's anything that you would rather just have the individuals, there are individual assessment guides as well as the general one. All right, the assessment guide for educators. Here's a picture of what the science one looks like. The rest of them are very similar. They just don't have science here. One of the great things that are in the assessment guide is not only that glossary, but also the item layout examples. Now, the item layout examples are the same for every subject. It shows the drag and drop, it shows the drop down menu. But I think especially for our science and social studies test, it's a great way of showing the students how they might be using those instead of just using a multiple choice question. So an example that I have is thinking about those sequencing of events, like the question that I gave you earlier. That one had a multiple choice, so it was just A, B, C, or D, but another iteration of that question would be to take those 4 answers and ask them to put them in order from what happened first to what happened last. So those item layout examples are really helpful. I also have a handout for commonly used scientific tools. And this handout is something that is available to you because I went to the conference. I believe that it is also on the GED website somewhere. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to locate it, and I know that I would rather you have the resource. So I did put a PDF and I just linked it on to my Google Drive so that you can see what that looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. Oh, I see that I'm getting some requests, so I will get to those here in just a second. I'm going to pull this over here so you guys can get a look at what this looks like. And you can see that it's broken into 2 different sections. It's the tools, so talking about some of the tools that students might see a question referenced, or they might ask something about this. But after the tools, they also have some of the current models that might be used as well. So that is what that is for. And looking at that, an important reason why we might need to look at this is because students may not have the experience, depending on what their educational background is. They may not have had experience with that before. So it's important that we have some time to look at that. I just put a link in the chat again. I believe if you click on that second link, you should have access to view this. Somebody can give me a heads up. Ah, okay, perfect. Thank you. So it's a really, really helpful tool for the science classroom so that students can have experience. Also, as teachers are looking to prepare their students, you know, they are not getting tripped up on something simple like it's put on a balance scale and what might be able to help. One of the things that is unique about the GED test is that they oftentimes are asking students to create an experiment, to critique an experiment, to identify the different parts of an experiment, to create a hypothesis from an experiment that was developed. And you can really get into it with AI, where you might be asking the students, or you might have the students asking AI to help them create an experiment that will test a specific hypothesis. And giving students a chance to look at that and to really dive down deep into looking at what do they need to control, what's okay not to have control over. things that they might not think of, like temperature and humidity, and using AI to get that development. Since you might not have the time or the equipment in your adult education classroom, it can really enrich that and give them a great idea. The other piece of the other website that I have for you is called Slow Reveal Graphs. And Slow Reveal Graphs is a website that is going to give you some different pictures that you will be able to use with your students so that they're able to see some different types of graphs like they might see on the test. And you can kind of choose what you want them to see and at what time you want them to see it. So maybe you only want them to see the name of the graph at first. Maybe you would like them to see a little bit more information, and it gives you the different types of graphs that you can look at. You've got line graphs, you've got bar graphs. So depending on your circumstances, it can give them a lot of different experience that they may not have had before with graphs. And we know science and social studies are definitely graph rich, and that gives you some different resources to look at with Slow Reveal Graphs. When we get to the social studies test is always one that a lot of students feel they're ready for, and then they don't realize what they don't know. So looking at those high priority areas of civics and economics, along with US history, those are the topics that are kind of hit really hard that students may not have a lot of experience with. Just like with the science, they may not have been in school long enough to get to those labs where they have experience with the lab equipment and setting up the labs. This is also an area where oftentimes civics and economics are one of the classes that are done towards the later years of high school. And if they dropped out early, or if maybe they had some attendance problems, they may not have a lot of experience with civics and economics. When I looked at the breakdown of questions, 75% of the test questions are about civics, government, and history. So any type of background knowledge building that you can do is definitely very helpful in this area. The ways that they're going to be using these skills, you're looking at the sequencing, you're looking at inferences with quotations. So the inferences with quotations, you're looking at, how did something that happened in World War II over maybe in Germany or in France affect the United States? So they might have something that someone said, and then they want to make some inferences based on what that quotation was saying, as well as comparing some of those different ideas for their similarities as well as their differences. So using those popular Venn diagrams to hopefully get some of that. Along with the science, social studies, and all of the other assessment guides, there is a glossary of those terms where that's going to be very helpful. One of the other things, and I know that I noticed this when I was in the classroom, is that timelines are a great way of gauging what students know a little bit about, but also kind of getting them interested in some things that they may not have realized have happened throughout time, as well as getting the perspective of when things happened. So timelines are a great way of getting some of those facts in and then branching out to learn more about events that happened throughout. One of the other areas to think about with social studies, the articles of the Constitution, specifically those first 4 articles, the separation of powers, checks and balances. They may not have a ton of experience with them, but they're all heavily hit topics. as well as the vocabulary associated with how a bill becomes a law. So all of that is really rich in the social studies area, and any experience that you can give students to have them build background knowledge, to have them understand the processes, is going to be very helpful in getting them that last little bit, as well as this would be another great way to use those slow reveal graphs that I showed you from the last slide to help them build that background knowledge. All right, we're doing pretty good on time here. And remember, if you have any questions, please stop me and I'll be happy to answer. So the next thing we're going to look at is just some general resources that are here for the GED prep. And in order to do this, I'm going to go over to the GED website so that we can look around and see what's happening here. So when you go to GED.com, there is a tab over here that usually says educators and administrators, and that's this kind of landing page that we've gotten to. When you get to the landing page, we did do a lot of exploring in the November webinar around the website, but if you have some questions, please refer back to that. But we are going to look at a couple of things that we didn't get to look at too in depth the other day or the other webinar. So one of the things that we're going to look at are these teaching resources. The teaching resources, we do have these educator guides over here, the educator handbook and the test taker brochure. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting was these how-to guides for supporting students. So especially our student support coordinators that maybe are looking at trying to help our students, there are how-tos on creating accounts, scheduling tests, applying for accommodations, all sorts of different little how-to resources to help the students. First signing up, but then over here also how to get that diploma once they've gotten all the way to the end and they've made it over that 140 to 144 hump. So the how-to guides are a great way to look at that. The calculator prohibited indicators, as well as some tips. I know I directed you to those before. Those are both great resources. And we are under the teaching resources tab right now. And here are those assessment guides that I referred to in all 4 of the subject areas. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the science one just so that we can look at this. But like I said, I do have a link for all 4 of them together. So if we look at the context, here is the area in chapter 2 where they're looking at all of the different types of questions. But I'm going to draw your attention to Appendix D, which has the glossary of terms. So on down here. Try not to make anybody dizzy. So this is where we can look for those terms that are going to be specific for the science test. There are going to be some other terms that they might see from other tests as well, but this is going to give a definite great resource for teachers and students to look at to try and figure out, some of those words that students might not have experience with, as well as some things that might be very specific to the science test that they may not have seen before, and give them a chance. So a great resource to use for that. And that vocabulary building is definitely a great way of helping students that might be getting there right to the edge. Also, like I said, the different item types, and there is a little bit of information if you are looking at the performance level descriptors. They're available as well separately, but if you want to look at the performance level descriptors, they're in there as well. So a great thing. One thing to be careful of is that there is still this outdated information about the short answer items. The short answer items have been removed from both the science and the social studies test. I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but just so that you don't see it and get surprised, they created this resource when the test was first available, and they just didn't pull them when those questions were taken off the test. So there are no short answer items on the science and the social studies, just on the RLA test. Coming back to the GED website, you can see here's those high impact indicators. When I looked at the skills students need to pass, those are the performance level indicators, but also we have these reports for all 4 of the subjects. If they're scoring in that, likely to pass, or they're just below passing, these are also a great guide that you can use to get some additional information that might be helpful for students. So looking at, let's do social studies since we've done a lot with science. That's going to take them back to what does it mean when you're scoring below passing, and some of the things that, depending on your report, you might be able to work on to try and get you to that next level. The bonus about these is if students haven't taken a test yet, but they still scored unlikely to pass, they also have these for the GED Ready, so that students can look at that and see where they might be lacking, so that they can finish that last little bit. In addition to the the teaching resources, we have the free classroom materials. So we have the computer-based test tutorial. That's going to take them through how they walk through the questions. And it's also got the calculator tutorial. So 2 separate different tutorials about the computer-based test. And then it does have a free practice test that they can use, as well as the study guides. And if we scroll down to the bottom, this is where you can find your extended response scoring tool and the extended response classroom practice, as well as those videos from Alice, where she's going to break everything down for the students in that 8-part series. Another important part that I like to highlight real quick is looking at the accommodations, and the accommodations that are available with or without documentation. It gives a nice process on how to apply, but also for just changing on-screen color, changing the text. It gives some guides for the students who might need that during the test. It gives them some practice on how they're able to do that so that they'll be comfortable. And it leads us nicely. This is actually not on the educators and administrators tab, but this is actually on the student tab. They have a blog, and in the blog, they have tips for all of the tests. And it just gives some ideas about the GED math test. How can you pass it? How to use a number line, some of the kind of commonly asked questions about students might have. And it's a great resource for students to do if they're preparing for the test. If you have some time in class that you're looking to focus specifically on test prep practice, this is a great thing to use as well. All right. We talked a lot about those close reading. That was the example that I gave you where they needed to put the events in chronological order. We have the high impact and the performance level indicators we got to talk about, and the mathematics formula sheet, knowing what's on there versus what's not, and how they might be able to use that and when they might be able to use that I know in my classroom, we used to talk about it a lot so that students knew what they could expect to be there and what wasn't going to be there. In addition, GED does have some prep products that they specifically created for students. So they have GED Flash, which is looking at some flashcards, GED Play, as well as GED Espanol and GED Direct. All of those are different resources that folks can take advantage of them. Some are free, some are paid resources. And in that same breath, there is a new GED and Me official GED app. Unfortunately, it is still only available for Apple. I know a lot of our students have the Android and they were hoping that they would have the Android version ready. But as of, I think a week ago when I created the final slides here, they had not yet created the Android version. But if you do have an iPhone or an iPad, you're able to do the GED and Me. There are some really nice resources on there, and that is a free app. They do not have to pay for that. They can download and use resources for free. I believe there are some paywalls in there eventually when you try and link up to some of the other resources, but there's a lot of great stuff on there that they do have access to for free if they're interested. And we're right down to the wire here. So we've still got a few minutes left if you do have questions. There is a QR code on the screen if you wouldn't mind going ahead and using that. If you are more comfortable with the link, I will drop that into the chat. And like I said, this is going to have some questions about both the first and second webinar. You didn't come to the first webinar, that's not a problem. You can skip right over that and just to do the questions for today. And if there is any resource that I shared that you missed the link, I'd be happy to share anything that I have in here. So please let me know and I'll be happy to send things. If you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. If not, I hope that you guys have a wonderful day and I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in a couple of weeks here at PACE. Oh, I told you guys that I would get that assessment guide for all of the subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Absolutely, Deb. I hope that you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
And there you go, the assessment guide. That is the assessment guide for all 4 subjects. If you want just one subject, the easiest way to do that is to go to the GED website and just click through and find it there. If anybody ever hasn't ever had a chance to use the extended response tool, that is on the GED website there, and it gives you an option to put the prompt that you received and grade your student's response electronically. You're welcome. Thank you. So Michael, it looks like we do have a few minutes if you would like me to hop over to Desmos.
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Forgot I was on mute.
No worries, no worries. So there's 2 different options. There's Desmos and there's Desmos Classroom. So the most popular option when you look at Desmos is looking at their graphing calculator, but they do have some other calculators as well. If we go over to Desmos Classroom, and this is a free sign up. I have no paid account or anything like that. Oh, I must have typed something in wrong here. Desmos Classroom. They have starter screens. There we go. So when you look at Desmos Classroom, you have screens for checking in, for checking understanding, looking at those fraction tasks. And there are, if we go to like the editable fraction tasks, you can see that you can assign them to the class, or you can just pick, let's say that I want to pick this one. I can just have students complete this, either on the board or independently, and have them practice different ways of representing fractions. You can also build your own.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find.
Seems like a winner.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's really interesting. Oh, there we go. So here's like a match my line. If you were looking at linear equations where you would be able to look at the different parts, they have a really cool graphing activity where it's called, I think, hit the target. And you can practice getting into the target range by putting in different coordinate pairs.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much for that.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad that I could help, and I look forward to working with you again soon.
Sounds good.
All right.